Okay, so in the unit on intelligence, a lot of questions come up about testing because can you really test for intelligence? What is intelligence? How can we measure it? So that's something that really comes up. So this is a good unit to review some things regarding testing and research design and like the design of tests. So if we could go back to in our earlier unit when we learned about the 34-14-2 rule, this is the rule that applies to the normal curve. So the normal curve, if you guys memorize 34-14-2, that represents the 34 is the number of individuals who lie one standard deviation from the mean to the left and the right. So combined, if we asked you what percentage of the population lies within one standard deviation of the mean, it's actually going to be 68% because we have 34% of the people being to the right above the mean and 34% of the people being to the left one standard deviation below the mean. So that's the really important rule, 34-14-2. 14, they have 13.5 written on this chart, but 14% is good enough for our purposes in the AP Psych. One thing I also want to draw your attention to is remember that if you added up 34-14-2 and multiplied it by 2, you would not get 100% because higher than 3 standard deviations to the left and the right, we also have a very small subset of the population. So we have to remember that not only 100% of the population falls between 55 and 145. There's actually people on really far extremes of this curve. Okay, so some questions you might see on the AP exam will be something like, even in a free response question, which you guys will have on this year's exam, they still might reference some of these numbers. So I want you to have them readily accessible so you don't have to waste time looking them up. So according to normal curve above, a score of 115 is higher than what percentage of scores? So if we look where the 115 is, it is right here. That lies one standard deviation to the right of the mean, median, and mode, but 34% of people lie right here, but they're asking what percentage of the scores. So don't forget that 50% of the scores lie onto the left of the mean, median, and mode. So we have the 50% that is to the left of the mean, median, and mode, and then the additional 34% that bring us up to the score of 115. So altogether, we have a total of 84% of the population that lies below the 115 score on the IQ, the Wechsler Intelligence Test. So if you have a score of 115, you have a score that is higher than 84% of the population. According to the normal curve above, approximately 99% of the scores fall between which two scores on an intelligence test. So like I just said, we have between 55 and 145. That represents about 99% of the population. So that would be letter C. And then the additional 1% of the population lies to the left and right over 3 standard deviations from the mean, median, and mode. Okay? All right, so intelligence. I know that you covered a lot of this in the video that I assigned for you, but I wanted to really cover it again because it's very, very important. Following this video, I'll also post another video recapping some things on motivation, emotion, stress, personality, which you'll have for our AP Classroom assignment, and also a couple things on treatment that I didn't get to personally share with you. So I think this is a very important part of this process that since you're learning from home, is for me to touch base with you personally. Okay, so we have intelligence as we age. So when you do cross-sectional research, you take people from various ages at one point in time. So we would say, like today, if I walked outside today and I pulled a 5-year-old, 15-year-old, a 50-year-old off the street and I tested them all at the same time, that would be cross-sectional research. Okay, so then when you compare those people, you're comparing cross-sections of the population. And when Wechsler did this with intelligence testing, he found that the older adults gave fewer correct answers on the IQ tests. So what he concluded was that the decline of mental ability with age is just a natural part of aging. However, when longitudinal research was done, meaning you do it over a long period of time, and you use the same individuals, which is called a cohort, you can see that intelligence actually remains stable. So when you give people In 1920s, they started this longitudinal research. They gave people an IQ test when they were 11 years old, and then when they were 80, they gave them to them a number of times throughout their life. But the real results came when they compared the results from when they were 11 and the results when they were 80, and they found that intelligence actually really remained stable over the course of their life. On some tests, it even increased, and then on some it decreased due to a number of factors. But generally speaking, intelligence does remain stable over the course of an individual's life. Okay, so that's very important to know. And there are two different types of intelligences. Crystallized, the way that I remember this, is a crystal takes a long time to form, and it's pretty solid, and it's not really going to crack or go anywhere anytime soon. And that's what crystallized intelligence is similar to. Crystallized intelligence develops over the course of your life. It is things like vocabulary, multiplication tables, presidents, your social security number. It's knowledge that can be reflected in a vocabulary and analogies test, and just any kind of like solid hard facts that you remember. That increases to an old age. You will continue to develop your crystallized intelligence through the course of your life. Now, fluid intelligence is something that actually decreases as you get older. It slowly decreases up to the age of 75, and this is your ability to reason quickly. So you know how sometimes you can do things so much more quickly than an older person because you're younger, and your fluid intelligence is higher for this point in your life. So that is what fluid intelligence is. If you want to remember it, fluid, it's how fluidly you can do things. The fluidity which you can complete tasks. Generally speaking, for younger people, it comes more easily when they're solving problems and reasoning quickly. So that will continue to decrease over the course of your life. That is a question I've seen come up a couple times on former AP exams. Okay, so there are some tasks in which older people can perform better than younger people. And this is important to know because these are skills that kind of come with life experience, and I've also seen this on the exam. So make sure you know that older people tend to have increased social reasoning. They may have experienced things in their lives that help them see the bigger picture social interactions more so than someone who's younger. They can also take multiple perspectives on an issue and see it from a couple different angles, and they can appreciate knowledge limits. Oftentimes, when we are younger, we get a little more frustrated with people's lack of knowledge, and as you get older, you will find that you'll be more appreciative of limitations of others in that sense. And then offering helpful wisdom. Through life experience, these individuals have acquired a lot of wisdom that they're able to share with younger people. So just keep that in mind, that just because you're getting older and you're not as quickly able to answer new logic problems, it doesn't mean that there's not a lot you can offer to the younger population. Okay, genetic and environmental influences on intelligence. We know that intelligence runs in families, but it is also dependent on the environment. Okay, so we can see that in identical twin studies, twins that were reared together, that means raised together, they have the same IQ test scores and numbers of someone who takes the test twice. Okay, so we also can see that brain scans reveal that identical twins have the same amount of gray matter in their brains, and intelligence is polygenic, which means that there are multiple multiple chromosomes that have genes for intelligence on them. Okay, so it's not just one chromosome that's responsible for your intelligence. And then adoptive children. We know that adoptive children resemble their adoptive parents in intelligence as they're growing up, but once they leave the home, the difference in their intelligence scores actually gets greater. Okay, so this is a really important topic, the Flynn effect. Over time, intelligence scores on intelligence tests have been improving, meaning that people generally about every 10 years, the average on the IQ tests was about 3 points higher than the decade before. So what has been happening, Flynn was the researcher who came up with and acknowledged this effect, and it's called the Flynn effect. And that is, so what has to happen is the WISC, that test has been recalibrated and redesigned, and that's called renorming. So they have designed the test to have increased difficulty, and they have also made sure that they calibrated these scores every year to have an average of 100. So over time, the average for human intelligence is still 100, but that is a result of renorming the WISC. So that has been done a couple times, and that's explained here in this paragraph if you're interested in learning more about that. Why does this happen? Why has intelligence been improving over the year or increasing over the years? Some possible reasons: better testing, better nutrition is a big one. A lot of these health and nutritional aspects we know are really impactful in the educational experience. More education. Students and children are staying in school longer and have a higher level of education. More abstract reasoning skills are taught at an earlier age. More stimulating environments, less childhood disease, smaller families, which allow parents to dedicate some more investment into each child's educational experience. And also, when you have smaller families, you have less of a need for the kids to get out and go to work right away to help support the family. So there has been a shift in that demand as well over time. All right, we have two other test topics and vocabulary words that are very, very important. Reliability. If you only are paying attention to anything in this video, pay attention to the next couple minutes. Reliability is the extent to which a test yields consistent results. Is it reliable? You have consistency on two halves of the test, or you can retest to test for reliability. It's really important to have reliability in testing because, for example, if I gave a test to students 3 years ago or 2 years ago, I want to make sure that the test has the same results as you guys achieved this year, because then I know my test is reliable and I'm going to have consistent results over time. That's very important in designing tests. Okay, there's two ways you can test for this. One, you can do retest reliability, where you can test a group, let's say on a Monday, and then test them on a Friday, and double check that they have basically the same results, as long as there has been no increase in knowledge between the two test dates. That's really important because a lot of things can affect people's performance on a test. You can have their mood may not be good. There may have been something that happened the night before to many of the subjects in the research. So it's important to have retest reliability. Also, another way of checking your reliability is split half reliability. Maybe I would give period 1 the even questions and period 3 or 4 the odd questions. This is a good way to check that there is reliability within the test, because I know that certain groups of questions aren't going to yield different results than the other set of questions. Okay, so this is a nice little graphic down here. This one on the left, this bullseye, is very important because it shows that you can have a test that is reliable. You can get consistent results, and that's really, really important. We know that. However, these arrows here are missing the mark. When you're trying to hit a bullseye, when you're trying to get and test for certain things, that requires validity as well, as you can see over here in this example. These are all hitting the same mark, so there is consistency in the results, and they're hitting the center mark. They are measuring what we want to measure, and that test, those results are reliable and valid, and that's really what you're trying to achieve when you design an assessment of any type. Okay, so let's talk about validity real quick. Validity. This is the definition, is the extent to which a test measure what it intends to measure. For example, if you have high reliability, which means you have consistent results, it doesn't mean that you definitely have valid results. For example, if I used an inaccurate tape measure to measure people's heights, my test would have high reliability but low validity. For example, if I measured that everybody who was really 6 feet were 6'3", they would all be consistent results, which was reliable. However, it's low validity. It's not actually what I was trying to measure. I didn't get results that were accurate for what I was trying to measure. So there's two types of validity. You have content validity and predictive validity. Content validity is when we are we're sampling the behavior that we are trying to actually assess. So for example, when you guys take the driver's road test, that is a little superficial environment, obviously, because you're in a safe driving course, but it is sampling the behavior that's of interest. We're seeing if you can parallel park, all of those things that are actually involved in an actual driving experience. That's content validity. Then we have predictive validity. Predictive validity tells us how much these results of this assessment are going to matter in the future. And for example, if I gave you a final exam in algebra, that should predict, if it has good predictive validity, that should predict how you're going to perform in your future math classes that require algebraic skills. So that is also sometimes called criterion-related validity. Criterion-related validity is the criteria of the test can predict future performance. Okay, so that is one way of also testing for validity. So if you jump back up here, one thing that might compromise your validity is when you're trying to create an assessment to test signed number skills. So if you were learning about integers in algebra, and I was testing all students cross-country in algebra, this question right here would not be a good one. So let's see if we can identify the flaw. If Adam's par score is -2 after the first hole in a golf game, and the second hole is a par 4 hole, how many shots would he have to take to have a score of par 0? Now, for some of you, this may seem like you may feel like you have no idea what they're talking about. And that's why this is a good example of an attempt to assess a skill, but actually it being impacted negatively and biased because people may not understand the rules of the game of golf. And if that has compromised your assessment of people in their signed number skills, then that test is not valid. And we have to be very careful about this, especially when you're designing intelligence tests. We have tendency to create some bias in testing just based on the experience of the test developers. So that's why we're always testing and retesting for validity, trying to eliminate all those biases that we can unintentionally create. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so statistical significance. We have talked about this before. I'm just going to stress it again. We didn't really go that deeply into it because I knew we were going to go over it again. But statistical significance is when you conduct research, you want to show that the effects, if you're going to come to the conclusion that one thing caused another in your experimental research, you need to prove that the results did not happen by chance. And if they didn't happen by chance, then that means your results are statistically significant. So you really want to have results that are statistically significant usually when you're conducting research. That's why you are conducting research. So that's why this little man right here is very happy. If you get a p-score of less than 0.05, then you have achieved results that are statistically significant. And this is really important. That means that your results were due to chance less than 5%. I mean, there's a less than 5% chance that your results just happened by chance. Okay, so that means that there's a 95% chance that the results you achieved were due to the variable that you were testing. So that's pretty exciting for researchers if they achieve that. Okay, so that is called statistical significance. Okay, so back to the bias, I just wanted to bring up two more examples. So when we're talking about the intelligence testing, we have some middle class assumptions that a cup goes with a saucer. So if you are looking at a picture and the child is supposed to identify the saucer that's underneath the cup, they may not be familiar with that term if they haven't had the experience with that type of setup in their kitchen or their dining room. And also insurance being necessary to protect a home. Some students may not live in homes that are owned by their parents, and they may not have the need to purchase insurance, and they may not drive a vehicle, and they may not use an individual vehicle, so they may not have to purchase car insurance. So insurance might not be something that's regularly discussed in their household, and they may not understand what it is, and to introduce that in some way on a test would create a bias, and it would be an invalid assessment of what you're trying to test, most likely, unless you're trying to test for knowledge of insurance, which is unlikely. Okay, also what's very, very important is the test taker's expectations. People who are taking a test, if you walk in and you do not think you're going to do well on a test, that can definitely affect your results. And a stereotype threat is a specific type of test taking expectation that can lead to negative results. What I really want you to notice is this is a self-confirming concern. This is not saying that there will be stereotypes about the individual taking the test and will look at their outcome in that way. This is talking about the person who walks into the test and their own concern about negative stereotyping can affect their achievement on the test. For example, there used to be this notion, which we know is not true, that girls are not good at math. And when I was younger, unfortunately, that was actually something that was said when we were growing up. Maybe not directly, but we were given the impression that girls aren't really good in math. So if you were to go into a math test with a big group of people and you had a self-confirming concern about the negative stereotype that girls are not good in math, that could impact your results. And you may think that you're being evaluated based on that negative stereotype. That's called a stereotype threat. Okay, this is often asked in questions on the AP exam regarding interviews. If you go into an interview, assuming that someone will have a negative stereotype about you, you may perform in an interview to confirm those concerns, even if you don't believe them yourself. Okay, so that's called a stereotype threat. Okay, heritability. Heritability is a measure of how much the difference between you and others can be attributed to genes. So, for example, that's what I really want you to memorize for heritability. It's how much of the difference can be attributed to genes. Okay, so if we look at IQ and intelligence scores, these people, the identical twins that are reared together, they have very similar genes and they have very similar environments. So you can see a very high correlation between their test scores within their group. Now, if you just slightly change that setup by putting them into a different environment and having them raised apart, you can see that the correlation decreases slightly. It's still very high, but it does show, since there is a change, it does show that there is some environmental effect on intelligence scores. Okay, so let's look at two sample questions here. Janelle and Chantel are identical twins but grew up in two different houses. Janelle's score on an intelligence test is 134. What can you predict about Chantel's intelligence score? Provide a rational explanation based on your reasoning. So because there's such a high correlation, 0.7, between twins that were reared apart, we can say that it's likely that Chantel's score will be near Janelle's. So we have a high correlation. You can say that they are likely to be similar because there's a high genetic component there. But then we also have, on the other side of this, we have Timothy and Kristen, who are both adopted children living in the same home, but they are unrelated. That would be this bar. Unrelated individuals reared together. So this has the lowest correlation, just a little bit above 0.3. So because these individuals have a very low correlation between their IQ scores, there's no real way to tell and predict what Timothy's score will be. So environment has impacted them both, but they don't have a genetic commonality, so you can't really make predictions based upon that low correlation and just them having the same environment. So there's a little bit more we can get into real quickly with this type of topic of heritability. So heritability is really important. That's why I want to make sure that you're with me on this. Here we see two trays. This tray, these plants were raised in nutrient-rich soil. These plants were raised in nutrient-poor soil. So there's a difference in their environment, but the same set of seeds were tossed into both trays. So let's go through some of this really quickly. How do we explain the difference in height within the tray on the left? Okay, within the tray on the left, we see this tiny little plant and this tall plant. Since they are raised in the same environment, any difference would be due to genes. Okay, so how do we explain differences in plant height within the tray on the right? Little plant, big plant. The difference between those would also be due to genes because they are raised in the same environment. How do we explain the difference in plant height between the two trays? Okay, the difference in plant height between the two trays, we see these trays are high up. These plants have grown higher than these, and the difference between this is due to the environment. So if we want to talk about heritability coefficients, we are going to say the heritability within each trait. So attributing, remember, heritability describes differences that are due to genetic influence. So if we look within each trait, remember that within the trait on the left, any differences that we saw could be attributed to genetic influences. So that would have a high heritability, and the coefficient would be close to 1. Heritability between two trees, we know that the major difference between the two trees' growth, the plants in the two trees and their growth, was due to the environment, and that would be a low heritability, and the heritability coefficient would be close to 0. Okay, thanks for watching. Have a great day.